Well, hello everyone, and welcome. Welcome to this month's Pwn School. Hope you all are doing well this week. Did anyone get to make it out to the North Texas ISSA meeting that's on? I mean, not meeting, but conference this past Friday. If you're on, just kind of let me know if you went. It was a lot. It was a lot of fun. It was good to get out and do some in-person conferences. This is like my third one of the year, which was good to be able to get out and see people and socialize. Had a really good DC 940 meeting Monday in Denton, Texas. Had a good turnout. Jeff, our speaker tonight, presented there. So in case you weren't there in Denton to see it, you got another chance to catch it here. A really great talk. One of the areas people really overlook when they're trying to get into cybersecurity is something like incident response. It's a really cool area. I mean, I really didn't know as much about it, except I had a job where I was working as red team lead, and I sat right next to one of the IR people, and just seeing the stuff that they do is very, very interesting. It's so for people just trying to get started out, that is a good option out there. It's a really cool field. And I mean, even if you're a SOC analyst, that's kind of a good way to pivot into if you're a SOC analyst and trying to make your next step. But I'm happy to welcome Jeff. So welcome, Jeff. So I'm not hearing you. Yeah, could you, let's see, for some reason you're not coming through. Let me see, make sure I got my mic and everything set up. I think I'm.
How about now?
So yeah, I'm not hearing you. Okay, we'll let Jeff connect back. I can hear sound now.
Hey, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Awesome. But Firefox privacy settings. This was first time using this particular platform, so had to jump through a couple small hoops to get this working. But thanks for having me on, Philip.
Yeah, thanks for joining again. You're hearing your talk at DC 940 was awesome, and I appreciate that you were able to step in. For those who are unaware, our presenter wasn't able to make it. He fell ill, and so luckily Jeff volunteered and stepped in, which is interesting. Jeff was talking to me when I had Neural Phantom presenting, and so just fortunately Jeff showed up and was there and stepped in and gave a talk. It's a really cool talk on ransomware. So I'm really looking forward to you all hearing it. And once we get finished with the presentation, we can have Jeff answer your questions. He answered some really good questions in Denton the other night. So I think you're really going to enjoy this as much as I did and the crowd there. So anytime you're ready to take it away, Jeff, you can share your screen. And
can you all see a PowerPoint?
There you go.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Jeff Belay. This is the slightly redacted story of how I spent my Christmas last year and how I hope to spend my Christmas again this year. So who am I? So once again, I'm Jeff Belay. I'm really big into the open source world. I've been doing incident response in the enterprise for 10 years, but I've been dealing with breaches for just over 25 years. And I've solved a lot of the problems that I've dealt with in incident response with Rep, Set, and Awk. And if you want to follow me, I'm at J Belay on Twitter. So this is a story where one of my clients had a destructive ransomware for the second time in less than a year, and this one actually hit at about 4 o'clock on Christmas morning, my local time here. So within 2 hours of the client calling us, we were on the phone understanding kind of what was happening in the environment. The client really had no positive control of the environment. To me, positive control is having control of the credentials, limiting the ability to execute, and excuse me, and being able to limit the network comms of a threat actor. So they had no control over that. In addition, this particular client was locked out of their Active Directory by the threat actors because they had changed a lot of or almost all of the domain admin passwords. So they were unable to provision us to get into their Carbon Black EDR to start hunting. So we ended up joining a WebEx, and then someone essentially logged one of my Carbon Black drivers in, and within 5 hours, which is a team record for my team, he had found patient 0. We've been in the environment for at least 6 months, helping them monitor for signs of the threat actors coming back, as well as other proactive and transformative services in that time period. So talk a little bit about the timeline of the attack. So like I mentioned, this was Christmas last year, 2020. However, this actually started back in 2019, a very targeted spear phishing campaign from TA505, Evil Corp, whatever you want to call them. Let me see if I can fix that. Hold on. Is that? No, I'm having some weird issues here. Huh. Phil, do you have any thoughts on how to fix that? There we go. So hopefully the video artifacting clears up a little bit here. But so this started in 2019 with a very bespoke payload from a threat actor known as TA505 or Evil Corp. You can see here the C2 domain looks very, very similar to an Amazon AWS excuse me, DNS name, and then the client had some inconsistent patching that allowed a 5-year-old CVE to be exploited there. I hate PowerPoint today. Yeah, I'm getting a lot of artifacting. Is everyone else seeing that?
Yeah, it's kind of something with the screen refreshing. I don't know if.
Let me see. Yeah, damn, that's kind of annoying. Let me stop sharing and reshare real quick.
Okay.
Better?
Yeah, it's a lot better. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Share the window versus share the screen. Awesome.
Okay.
Yeah. So the attack by the numbers. So the threat actors were in the environment for around 14 months, but they were mostly silent for about 11 of those months. From the time the initial patient 0, this is that first ingress into the environment, they landed on an end user workstation. Within 20 minutes, they had broken out of that device and began doing some lateral movement in the environment. Within 3 days, they had domain admin. This is part of one of the standard double extortion campaigns where they both ransom your data after they exfiltrate your data and say, pay us money or we're going to leak your data and lock your data up. And then between the exfil and the ransom, there was slightly less than 24 hours, and we've been helping them in the environment for the last 10 months. Within the environment, there were at least 535 impacted systems. This is systems where the threat actors were in the environment, so they were literally all over the freaking place. There were 197 systems. These were mostly servers ransomed in this particular campaign, and one ransomware variant. This is called out specifically because in a number of cases, we've actually seen the threat actors use multiple variants of ransomware to kind of achieve their goals. Generally speaking, one is geared towards servers, and then the others are geared towards workstations. So here's the kind of the timeline of the attack. So back in 2019, we see 5 devices infected with SDB bot. It's a custom rat, only used by TA505 Evil Corp. We see a little bit later down the line, we see some customized tools. These are mostly some reconnaissance tools, also very, very closely associated with TA 505 Evil Corp. From there, we start seeing that breakout, that lateral movement and domain reconnaissance. We see them moving within this environment on the 9th. So, this is kind of where I would want my client to kind of stop this, but unfortunately they were unable to. They then, because of some loose domain trust, they were able to pivot from client domain 1 to client domain 2. We see a lot of lateral movement within there. And then we start to see the data exfiltration from domain 1 and domain 2. Unfortunately for our client, the threat actors were able to get into their on-premises AV console and essentially disabled it en masse there, in addition to deploying the standard batch file to disable Defender. And then late in the evening on the 24th, early on the 25th, U.S. time, we see the threat actors deploy the ransomware. And then we see them lock the customer out by changing all of the administrative passwords. Luckily, they still had access to their Carbon Black console, and they were able to basically use some threat actor tactics to get back into their network. And let's see if this is the build slide. Let's hope this does well. No. So this unfortunately is a build slide, but essentially what we see here is a lot of, we see the phishing message here. Unfortunately, it's kind of obfuscated here. So it shows kind of that urgency that most phishing messages have. We see the customized quote fileless dropper of the STB bot malware. This actually had a run key that would load from this specialized random software key that had a very long registry key, which kind of led us into it. From there, we see the threat actors deploy a tiny interpreter within the environment. One of the interesting things about this particular version of Tiny Interpreter is it's actually signed. There are a couple of pretty shady signers out there, one of which is Sectio, which we see very, very frequently within ransomware attacks. Then we see, creation, here we go, it's the persistence there. So we have persistence of going in here. So there's a file that gets loaded on boot on every system. From there, we see them doing a privilege escalation. This, if you would see this, it would be the echo into a pipe, which allows them to, essentially get system. That's kind of what it looks like to me as a blue teamer. From there, we see them disabling AV. This is a very standard part of the toolkit in which they disable the AV with a batch file. Mentioned the client's particular challenges with zero logon. This was about 6 months old at the time it was exploited by the threat actors. So they obviously had a lot of challenges around patching and asset management. The threat actors ended up using Bloodhound. They were pretty noisy about it. There was probably, I think, 8 to 12 different zip files that they had left for us. It was kind of interesting for us. We got to play red teamers for a little bit and pull Bloodhound in and see what the threat actors saw, and kind of helped us with our investigation. From there, we see standard network discovery. It's behind here, NL test and whatnot. The threat actors got onto one of the devices and were able to get cached RDP credentials and basically just start jumping around. This was unfortunate for the client because those credentials were privileged across multiple domains. Still part of the standard ransom toolkit, the command line version of 7-zip to kind of lock things up there. And then from there, we see our clone. The threat actors actually invoke this as service host in an attempt to kind of hide from it. But this command line argument kind of speaks volumes to me. When I see this, service host with any arguments, it's kind of a giant red flag. And then the threat actors ended up, detonating the ransomware with via PSExec and logon scripts. One thing I missed here is the domain fronting. One of the things they ended up doing with their Cobalt Strike beacons in this particular case was domain fronting as an OCSP.verisign.com. So that's for the certificate revocation and certificate infrastructure associated with VeriSign. We were able to find this because we were able to get the Cobalt Strike beacon, which showed us the fronting. But one of the other things that they were doing what they were doing the fronting was to hide from the Palo Alto's traffic classification. So we were seeing OCS, 3 gigabytes of OCSP traffic over the course of a few weeks from a couple of hosts, and that just kind of screamed at us as well. And then down here the ransomware again. So there were a lot of opportunities for the client here to have some detection opportunities and some prevention opportunities. So the initial access was via some phishing emails, so user education there, and then proper patching to prevent this particular set of Office macros there. We see the use of PowerShells, so they were not monitoring this very well and not looking for those nasty encoded PowerShells. One of the other things that would have helped them was monitoring of new services, especially on servers. A little bit of if you see a service creation on a server that has a seven character hex string, it's probably Cobalt Strike, and it's probably bad. Moving on, there were a lot of opportunities there for the client. So the way that the threat actors disabled the antivirus, when 500 or 5,000 machines go off of an AV console, that's a notable event that needs to be really taken care of. And then one of the other interesting things is because this was occurring, the client was in Europe, so the logins for the administrator account that was compromised would have normally been caught by some kind of conditional access or user behavior monitoring around those kind of credential usages. So one of the other places that they could have caught this was in the discovery phase, where the threat actors were running NL test, who am I, Q user, and query, kind of looking for those things in sequence, especially things running as either system or administrator to make sure what's happening on that device. They didn't have very good network telemetry. It was very difficult to help them validate the total volume of data exfiltration, which is important for the regulatory compliance stuff. And so that was an opportunity they had there. And then because in this particular intrusion set, the threat actors ended up creating a number of mounted shares within the environment, basically in sequence using what we think is a Cobalt Strike aggressor script. Seeing a lot of mounts happen in a few moments is also notable and should be investigated and or monitored. Moving on to the exfiltration bit, talked a little bit about the domain fronting. So if they've had some content around looking for anomalies in their traffic patterns, that would have caught a lot of the command and control and almost all of the exfiltration. A funny thing about this particular exfiltration is their Palo Alto, that wasn't their Palo Alto, it was their DLP system that was catching things because the threat actors were sending them across in plain text. And there were some malware in some of the old files that the threat actors were trying to exfiltrate out. And then, monitoring for use of PSExec within the environment. There are a lot of other options besides PSExec to use within a Windows environment to do this kind of remote execution that's a little bit less, let's say, threat actor in my opinion. And once you get here where the threat actors have own everything, monitoring for impact is let's say not super useful because you have literally either minutes or hours from exfil to impact. So that's just the that last little bit there of the campaign. One of the interesting things we were able to do, and with pretty high confidence, is the attribution of this particular threat actor and their intrusion set to TA505. This impacted our client's decision to either engage or not with the threat actors because TA505 is that, or Evil Corp is that one, at least recently, the one organization that you cannot negotiate with no matter what in terms of a ransom. Otherwise, you'll face very steep penalties from the SEC. So we were able to work with our cyber threat intelligence team to really give our client an idea, and that helped form a lot of their business decisions going forward. So the client had a number of lessons learned as a result of this, and we were able to help them within the last several months realize a number of them. Unfortunately, both events were caused by end user issues. The first one was caused by someone trying to download a printer driver from Google, and this was someone clicking on the fish. Interestingly enough, this particular, in the second campaign, the person, patient 0, actually clicked on the fish twice, once in 2019, once in 2020, and this person was a member of the IT security staff. So definitely help getting user training around that. We talked a little bit about the user behavior and analytics. There was no multi-factor internally. They kind of had that old model of once you're on the inside, it's crunchy and soft. And then since the threat actors had access to these service accounts, they weren't monitoring for interactive logons or anything like that. And there was a lot of technical debt in the environment, which allowed the threat actors to very, very easily dump credentials a number of times, not just with zero logon within this particular environment. I mentioned segregation of the two networks. So there was bidirectional transit of trust between those two networks. And it got even worse for the client because there were actually bidirectional transit of trust to every one of their business units. So there was the potential for this to spread very far and very wide very quickly. And they got, I would say, very lucky because they did not pivot into those other business units. And then, one of the other things we ended up helping them with is designing an egress policy to make sure even between business units and quote trusted parties, you need to have good fences, otherwise bad things will happen. And then kind of one of the other root causes was bad patch management on the part of the client. That 5-year-old CVE really let them down a trail of pain. And then one of the other things, and this is really common, is the endpoint controls were not universally applied. There were a couple of different EDRs, there were a couple of different antiviruses in different configurations run by different teams, and so there was really no single focus security policy applied on the endpoints within this particular client. And that's all I have. Any questions? Happy to answer.
Yeah, thanks for the awesome presentation. I was curious. I would imagine, are you guys seeing a lot in the incident response side? Are you seeing a lot of PowerShell related?
Oh yes,
Stuff?
absolutely. Yeah, PowerShell is a big thing. What's really interesting is recently had a client who disabled PowerShell for almost everything. So the threat actors had to actually get a little bit more creative and use other tools other than encoded PowerShell.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I know from the offensive side, seeing people start using like C# and
Yeah.
Golang, try to get around EDRs?
Yeah, that's a common thing. Recently, we did another one where the threat actors were very, very light on disk, and it was really difficult to track them. So we ended up having to do a lot of event log forensics to really track them down and say you went from here to here to here, to kind of figure that out.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, I know Cobalt Strike has been a big thorn in the side of
Well,
IR folks now.
yeah, so a few years ago, we really started seeing an uptick in Cobalt Strike with ransomware, and we started tracking a lot of the different C2 addresses. And so essentially, whenever we go into an IR now, we take the Cobalt Strike list with us, and I'd say a good 70 to 80% of the time it pops. It's really helpful to kind of track those adversaries, especially those initial access brokers.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
So anyone have any questions? You want to take advantage of this because at the DC 940 meeting on Monday, we had a lot of great questions, and so you don't want to lose the opportunity of this resource.
Yeah, or ask me general IR questions. I'll answer as directly as I can. Well, I want to be employed tomorrow, so.
Yeah, and I'll go ahead and pop this up here. I didn't do this in Streamlabs, but I will put Jeff's Twitter handle up in here. So if y'all want to follow him on Twitter.
Yeah, Conti has been a really painful one. There were a couple really good leaks from the Conti ransomware. Basically, they had a disgruntled employee who got hit. I'm sorry, a disgruntled ransomware operator who basically leaked their entire toolkit. No, I am not on call 24/7. Well, I kind of am as one of the incident response leads. But what we do is we are part of a global team. So essentially, 5, 6 o'clock in the evening, I'll get on the phone with the Australians, and they'll take over for us, and they'll pass to the Brits, and we'll basically go around the sun as much as we can there.
Yeah, that's a good thing to have global
Yeah.
teams, because I remember back in my sysadmin days, we didn't have global teams, and it was up to
No.
us to be on call like all the time. So
Yeah, we try to keep pretty decent shifts. Most people's shift is about 8 or 6 to 8 hours, all that time. So it's a pretty good work-life balance there.
So for someone interested in getting into IR, how would you recommend them start out, or how would they prepare for such a role?
First, you can read my favorite book, The Cuckoo's Egg by Clifford Stoll. It's the true story of a sysadmin back in 1988 who tracked a Russian hacker across the internet. It's actually what got me interested in incident response. Additionally, there are some really good CTFs out there. Cyberdefenders.org has really good CTFs. And there's a lot of great data out there to do that. Additionally, the SANS courses, I think it's 508 and 500 right now, are really good to get into that kind of the forensic side of things. But forensics is more incident response at depth, and incident response is forensics at speed. I can send some resources over to Philip that I use and send over to people to blast out if that works for everyone.
Yeah, we could do a tweet out to through the Pwn School Twitter account.
Yeah. So there's a bunch of great free resources out there. You can get a lot of free malware if you want to play around with that, or free threat intel to learn that. There's a lot of different aspects to incident response. There's the general investigative side. There's that malware reverse engineering side, threat intelligence side. I'm trying to think of what else we do. Deep forensics, and then actually what's the most important part is being able to communicate those findings to our clients, because it's really great that we find cool stuff and look at bad guys all the time, but until we really communicate that, we've only done about half of our job. So it's an interesting thing. It's never good when I show up at your company. I hope it's always better when I leave.
And I just shared a link with some folks that I have found pretty helpful for resources, free and low
Yep.
cost training, DFI or Diva.
Yep. Yeah, she does a lot of cool stuff out there.
She goes above and beyond on curating her list. A lot of people just throw up a bunch of links and that'd be it. But she really takes a lot of time and effort into curating her list of resources.
Yeah. Let's see.
So what about certifications that are helpful for?
Mostly the SANS ones. Those are really the most prized ones in the field. So yeah, those, and then I'm trying to think of the other ones we like. The GCFA, which is SANS, and GCFE are really, really good. In addition, the GRIM is also really valued there. Yes, we see. So between October and January, February is the busiest time of the year. I like to say October is always lit for us in terms of incidents. The other thing that really kind of amps things up is we see a lot of incidents around quarter close and year close. So that really puts the pressure on companies if they're having to report, if it's a public company and they have to report out their earnings and they've been ransomed, they're in multiple levels of peril there.
Yeah, Benson said surprisingly, Conti hasn't posted any files to its blog with the hit that he was talking about.
One interesting thing that we've kind of seen as an evolution is or a potential evolution is ransom without the ransomware. So we've seen this one threat actor group essentially go in, gain access and then do exfiltration. And then they send the standard ransom note on the desktop. But if you don't talk to them, they will keep coming back and leave you really passive aggressive messages in the form of flag files on your file servers. They specifically called out a particular EDR vendor saying blah 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 won't help you in this case. So yeah, they're getting a little aggressive. We had thought they had gone quiet, except they posted their first victim on their shame site today. So that was kind of interesting that they must be busy processing all that data that they've exfiltrated. I think this particular client lost, I think, about 1.5 terabytes of data, and we had to help them catalog that so that there could be a data mined for PCI.
Wow.
Yeah. Ransomware negotiations are kind of a weird thing. So the company I work for, we steer way away from that. So we essentially outsource to a third party. But what's interesting is they keep statistics on how truthful or how honest these ransomware crooks are. So they say, if you negotiate down, 73%, you have a 90% chance of getting your data back. We know X, Y, and Z about the decryptor, and basically they can give you a good idea whether or not you should pay or not. The decision to pay is really complicated and a very business-driven choice.
Yeah, that would be bad to pay one of the ransoms and you can't decrypt
data. I've seen poorly written decryptors that won't decrypt more than 50 megabytes at a time. So if you have a large database file that got encrypted and you're one of these lower-end ransomware groups, you might be screwed on either way.
So does some of the cyber insurance cover any ransomware?
Yeah, it does. So a lot of companies will choose to invoke their cyber insurance, and essentially that gets them a better rate on incident response, and then a little bit on some transformative and preventative services going forward. It's an interesting industry. I think AXA XL in France last year decided to not pay any ransoms out. So they took kind of a hard line there. There's been not a lot of developments, but more little stringent on the purse strings with the cyber insurance providers, at least in my experience in the last 6 months.
Yeah, I got an idea for the cyber insurance, what they should do. You know how the car insurance has the good driver discount? They should have a discount for uh, little to no risk acceptance in your organization.
Yeah, 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 and kind of do that, it almost like that pre-existing condition. Do you have Windows 7? Do you not have MFA? Oh, we can't give you cyber insurance yet. Yeah, you have to clear your pre-existing conditions there.
Yeah, because it just, as far as being a pen tester, one of the things I really hate to see is risk acceptance. Back uh, early in my consulting days, because the first 5 years of my pen testing career was spent in consulting, and so one time I got command line access through SQL injection and was able to dump the password hash and crack the service account running the web server. And the company that we were doing the pen test for, since it was the development environment, they filed a risk exception.
Yeah, every time you file a risk exception, it's like building your house on sand. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's that little bit's going to shift and something's going to break, and you're going to have foundational problems going forward. Yeah, every time you accept a risk, it's one more grain of sand in the foundation.
So kind of like one of the sayings, every time something happens, an angel gets their wings. So every time you file a risk acceptance, a threat actor gets their wings.
Yes, or pops a shell, one of the two.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's even better. Yeah,
yeah,
that's a better analogy.
yeah. Let's see what else we can talk about ransomware. So in addition to the one of the more interesting ransomware cases we worked was had multiple ransomware variants. One of which was actually able to run under Wine under Linux that we saw the threat actors use because they popped a Linux box and had good access to one of their network attached storage devices. And they went in and they popped that as well. Um, One of the more interesting things I've seen ransomed was a Splunk server. So our client lost all of their logs and could not recover them. So we had a very difficult time getting through all of the forensics to give them that answer around what happened and how and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
My wife works in digital forensics. She does a lot of the collection type stuff, not really much on the incident response side. So this stuff is very interesting.
Yeah, for me, we actually do very little for traditional forensics. It's more incident response because that's kind of our specialty.
Yeah, I can imagine too with all the ransomware. I'm sure.
Yeah, it kind of goes ransomware, business email compromise, and then when I get really lucky and the threat actor gods smile on me, I get an APT kind of as my reward for doing all these ransomware cases.
Well, that's cool.
Yeah.
So have you ever discovered any APT groups that were kind of unknown?
I have. There's one that was an Iranian threat actor group that was previously unknown, hit one of our clients. They operate in the communication space, so it's kind of really topical because the Iranian threat actors have been going after internet infrastructure and communication providers over the last couple of years. And what we were able to tell, and this is actually one of my other favorite stories. This was an all Linux environment. So I'm a Linux dude. This was a gift. An APT case that's all Linux. I mean, come on. But I must have done something good in a previous life. So the client initially thought they had been in the environment for about 3 to 6 months. We gave them some really horrible news and said, no, your client, they've been in there for 3.5 years. And oh, by the way, they've been popping in every 6 months to maintain their access into your environment. And one of the cool things about this was we were able to figure out exactly what they were doing. This was some geopolitical espionage. They were really targeting some of this client's downstream clients, which was really interesting. And then this client actually tried to, let's say, recover their data, meaning they might have hacked back. So
Oh wow.
that was a first for me. Obviously we can't say who it is, or or if we can't give them the advice to either do that or not. But it was cool because they actually brought back some artifacts from the threat actor's server that I would have never been able to see unless the FBI was involved.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So we got a question. In your experience, do you see ransomware hit some industries more than others, like banks, schools, hospitals, etc.?
Opportunistic. It's whatever door is open. Now there are a few groups who say we don't hit hospitals, we don't hit medical facilities, but they're to quote a friend of mine, they're all a bunch of lying liar pants. They're going to hit the targets. They're going to go for that monetization and really get there into there. Any TTX for a ransomware? Oh, for financial art. I would say, focus it on having them hit the gold. So whatever the gold is in the environment. So if they can knock out service, if they can, cause transactions to be unreliable or things like that, I would definitely do that, because that is really the pain point in which the threat actors would hit that organization, at least in my estimation.
Yeah, one of the things I was recently thinking about too is if companies are not doing it, you would think that people would take in consideration on their disaster recovery and business continuity plans, things like ransomware and how to recover from that.
Yeah, there's a subpart of, or I won't say a subpart, part of my team that's all they do is essentially TTXs and readiness exercises, and to kind of help our clients not need the other side of my team, my side of the team, the investigative and emergency incident response side of things. Great question. The difference between IR and forensics. Incident response is forensics at speed. So we use a lot of forensic tactics to get to the answers in incident response, but we're really trying to get that tactical, quick, right answer so that we can create that picture and expel the adversary and do the needful there. Forensics is more at depth. You have generally very specific goals and very specific things that you're going to want to do, and it's a lot less, let's say, fungible than incident response.
So you find that forensics is more usually typically after the fact.
Yes, yeah. Incident response is in the moment, right now. Things might be literally on fire.
Yeah, some of the things I've seen and heard of, because knowing people that do digital forensics, is a lot of times it could be someone went to work for someone and they exfilled some intellectual property or contacts that they sent out, and they like formatted their machine, and someone's going back to try to get information so they can prosecute the person.
Yeah, it's like being a digital janitor almost, having to go through or an archaeologist, it might be a better analogy there, where you're digging through these random clues and trying to make sense out of this random data and coax it into coherence, and then you have to kind of coax that into what your client can digest and understand. So not specific to Conti, but we've seen the typical ransomware breakout we're seeing is anywhere between a few hours to about 3 months. The story I told earlier was kind of an extreme example of a 14-month dwell time, but anywhere between a few hours to a few months.
So T. Benson says intellectual property is speaking his language. Yeah, it's pretty interesting, because I talked to, speaking intellectual property, a company I was working for last year. We had a meeting with some people, a company that does some threat intelligence for us, and they were talking about a hardware manufacturer that had implants from nation states to come in, hired, got a job legitimately, and then was stealing intellectual property.
Yeah, the insider threat is a really hard thing to quantify sometimes. What we've kind of found useful in this is view the insider threat as an internal APT. They already have persistence, they already have internal knowledge, and they're already motivated to get hands-on objectives. So when we view it like that, it's a lot easier than viewing it as a traditional insider threat. We worked a case a while back where it was an insider threat. A high-level executive for a company suddenly dropped a termination notice that she was leaving the company, and they went back and reviewed some of her access logs. So the night before, she goes into the office. They can see her badge. They can see her plug a USB drive in and sync her entire home drive down. And then the funny part is we were able to recover the Google search she did for her resignation letter. She essentially cribbed her resignation letter from Google. Yeah, but the sad thing for the client was, yeah, she did this once. No, actually, she did this every 6 months for the past 4 years. So
Oh,
she
wow.
had been, copying this data out quite a bit. Yeah, universities are seeing a big uptick in insiders, doing all that, government-funded research and things like that. One of the interesting things is, looks like, it's mostly the Chinese and the Russian. I'm sorry, the Chinese and the Iranians targeting universities so far, at least in my experience so far. Not so much the Russians or the North Koreans, although they might be outsourcing because there's a really vast criminal marketplace that you could buy anything.
Yeah, the insider threat stuff is kind of interesting. You take some of the motivation too, because I'm sure there's still cases. Because I remember back years ago, as a sysadmin, sometimes you just had people that were disgruntled
Mm-hmm.
employees that might maliciously try to delete something or
Oh
just
yeah.
kind of wreak havoc on the company.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same as having a ransomware actor in the environment. What are they going to destroy? What are they going to take? And what are they going to knock over on the way out the door?
Yeah, my one and only time that really got to doing incident response kind of stuff. I was working my first security job, and the company that was providing software for us, it was like maps for mortgages or something. Flood maps were provided, and this third party was creating these maps and stuff. And they noticed some strange activity, so we targeted this one guy's computer, and it ended up being a developer. We thought it was this other guy in the organization, but actually, as a developer was downloading code from the vendor, just trying to reverse engineer the code. So it really wasn't doing anything malicious, well, unless he turned around and tried to make something out of it or steal their code. But it was interesting because someone was just downloading and just not exactly what you thought and not who we thought. Because this one guy, we thought, yeah, this guy is difficult to deal with, and he's kind of running shadow IT in his group, not really going through IT and security for stuff. We sure thought it was him, but it was innocent. Some other guy, just developer downloading code and reverse engineering it just to see how it worked.
I will say that doing incident response in a heavy development shop is really difficult because developers do a lot of crazy things that are very threat actor like, code injections, running, net use from the command line. So it really, when we go into these, unique businesses, it really changes the way that we look at the threats, because, what might be normal at a heavy dev shop would be really unusual at a financial organization, for example. So yeah, kind of understanding what's quote normal in these various business groups is really helpful to us to really give our clients the service they need. Yes, I have some strong, possibly controversial opinions on DLP. Yes, it does keep honest people honest. Unless you're breaking SSL or TLS, it's not super useful in the modern era. And unless you have a really good desktop agent, it's very ineffective. One of the other fun things we've seen about particular DLP implementation is it's implemented through GPO. And if the threat actors are operating inside of the system context, GPO doesn't apply inside of the system context. So they're able to march around with impunity and basically say, uh, digital loss prevention. So it's essentially making sure your sensitive data does not go out the front door. Yes, yeah, it's one of the, for me, from a strict incident response in my own personal point of view, it's one of those things. It's a checkbox thing that organizations have to do, but it doesn't help. So DLP is essentially a network, in most cases, a network-based agent or something like that watches for various keywords like social security numbers, company confidential, or whatever tagging is in there, and it will essentially, either block using kind of an IPS IDS type standard, or just a log of what's going on.
And the acronym stands for data loss prevention.
Yep. Why doesn't the U.S. ever hack back? I don't know that they haven't.
Yeah, I would imagine they would.
Yeah, there is a group in the NSA called the TAO, and that's supposedly what they do. Now, in terms of companies hacking back, it becomes a really weird legal and business decision whether or not you want to hack back, because if you do get caught, you could be putting the company at great risk. But it's kind of that who's going to tell on you? The threat actors, or the threat actors going to say, company XYZ hacked into my Cobalt Strike server and stole all my stuff that I stole from them. No, that's not going to happen, but there's still a risk.
Yeah, that, and if you make them mad and just give them more motivation.
Yeah. CASB, not so much. I do like the conditional access rules, making sure that you're logging in from somewhere normal. A lot of times, one of the easy buttons for us is when we see VPN logins from DigitalOcean, that's a bad thing. It's really easy to profile that. So, it's one of those things it's helpful. Yeah, it's rumored that the U.S. government did hit Revel. They definitely did get the Bitcoins from them, or at least some subsection of them. I think it was like 80% of the $5 million in Bitcoins. Yeah, it happens, but we don't hear about it very often, would be the best way I would say that. Any other questions? Happy to answer any incident response questions I can.
Yeah, one thing, not incident response, but I really like that lamp you got in the background. Is that like a train lamp, or what is that?
It is a old ship lamp. My wife got it. I liked it, and so I put it in my office.
Oh, cool. Very interesting.
Yep. The best part I like about my job is I get to dig and find things that others can't. And essentially, one of my favorite things, and I say this often, is pushing the initial data compromise back is my jam. So, client thinks that something happens, on a Friday, and that's the entirety of the event. It almost never is. It's especially in the APT campaigns. It's a long campaign. We worked, I mentioned the campaign that lasted 3 years at one of our clients, and that's not even the longest one we've seen in the past few years. The other part is I get to be really, really nosy into everyone's network and get to see all of those secrets. And, yeah.
So I have a question for you. So have you seen like the threat intelligence resources and stuff? How's that improved over the past recent years?
It really has improved. So between people actually sharing information together a bit more openly over the past few years, I think that's really helped. The use of what's called private sharing communities, essentially, IR friends of IR friends sharing, indicators and TTPs across it has really helped as well. And then, you can never discount threat actor mistakes. we've been able to capitalize on so many of those to understand how they've been operating in the environment. Yeah. Totally recommend Cliff Stoll's book. Funny story, I actually own a first edition copy. My dad was doing some cyber work for the military back in the early 90s. I read the book when I was 16. Somehow it left with me when I left home. Fast forward to a few years ago, a buddy of mine was at B-Sides, I think Raleigh, and got my first edition signed. So it's yeah, I love it. I read that book about once every 2 to 3 years. It's good read. If you're a little ADD and want to watch a YouTube video, the KGB, the Computer and Me. It's the PBS note version of the story, and you'll get to see Cliff Stoll, who is, let's just say, a very unique character.
So yeah, I have a question for you. So what is like the longest you've ever, any of the instance you've ever worked on, the longest you've seen the threat actor been in an environment?
4.5 years.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, and we were able to track that back because there was a lot of forensic evidence that, in the environment. We were able to tell every time they exfiltrated data. There was a particular vulnerability in the Oracle client that the threat actors were able to essentially get the database password and essentially, dump the data on a regular basis and then use a command line RAR to compress it for exfil. It's a Nova. It's called the KGB. Yep, there we go.
I looked that up the other day and added the feature I love about YouTube is the watch later. Yeah. So I added that to my watch later list. So there.
I don't have an opinion on that particular course. I don't have any exposure to that.
Yeah, Ghost is always winning free stuff.
It's a cat and mouse game. It will, as long as there are dedicated defenders and dedicated attackers, it's going to be that incremental shift this way, just a little bit left and right. Ransomware was a big game changer in terms of the left-right movement. Who's winning, but a lot of companies are getting better around that.
Well, we got about 3 more minutes in case anyone else has any more questions. I do appreciate you joining us and sharing your presentation.
Absolutely. Happy to be out here and chat. Always happy to chat about incident response.
That's good. That's something people, I feel like too many times people, and if you want to be red team, you want to be a pen tester, go for it. But I do think you should look at other areas, and there's cool stuff. I mean, IR has a lot of cool stuff, so I mean, it's not only pen testing is the fun stuff. There's other things.
I think we lost your audio.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can't hear you.
Okay, it's weird.
SANS recommendations: SANS 500, 508, and then 610.
Okay. Weird.
Nope.
Audio. I don't know why I lost my audio.
Not at all. It took a long time to get good at IR. It took weird. Okay. Must be on my end.
It's kind of weird. Okay, because I can see the sound bar.
Yeah, it took a long time to get good at IR. It was a lot of banging my head against the walls, especially around reporting when I was first doing this formally. The technology part kind of came easier for me, but that reporting out was something that I really had to struggle with initially, and it's something I finally I think I've gotten good at. Mm-hmm. You can't learn it all. I promise. I've been trying for 25 years, and it's impossible.
Yeah, and I think that's even the case if you pick an individual discipline too.
Yeah,
Hard to learn, even in pen testing. It's hard to learn all of it because usually not if you learn most of it, then you're not going to be as good. So yeah, I don't discourage you from try. Go for it and try. I don't want to
yeah,
discourage anyone. But when you figure it out, come back and let me know how you did it. that you'll make a lot of money if you can figure that out.
yeah. Yeah. If you can get your employer to pay for a SANS course, strongly recommend it. I'm getting ready to take my ICS certification whenever I can get a week or so off.
Yeah, and that's the good thing about SANS training. At least they keep it up to date, and the people
Mm.
that are creating the content are experienced individuals in the in the industry.
Yeah, I find so when we're trying to hire people, we're looking for that offensive mindset as well because we want you can learn forensics and you can do well at that, but the threat actors are constantly changing. You're like, okay, what would I do if I was a threat actor? I popped this Tomcat box. I got a web shell on there. What's the next thing I would do? And really having a good understanding of both sides of the equation is helpful for, I would say, for both the red teaming and blue teaming.
Well, we're down at the end of the show, so thanks again for joining us, Jeff.
Absolutely.
Awesome presentation, and thanks for sharing your wisdom and answering the questions for us all.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, and thanks for everyone.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining, and we'll see you next month.